echoing announcements and shivering transients, all of them praying for a delay, a cancellation, any excuse not to step out into the freezing night. Emily did not want to step into the night. As a trauma nurse at Massachusetts General, she spent her days pulling shrapnel out of gang members and holding the hands of fading grandmothers. She understood the fragility of life. But tonight, standing on Platform 9, her knuckles were bone white as she gripped the heavy leather straps of a navy blue canvas duffel bag. Inside, wrapped tightly in vacuum-sealed plastic, was $48,000 in used, non-sequential $100 bills. It was her life savings, plus a ruinous high-interest loan she had taken against her late mother's house. It was the buyout price for her younger brother's gambling debt. The men holding him in a Brooklyn basement had been explicitly clear: board the night train, bring the cash, and wait for the call. Amtrak night train number 17, direct service to New York Penn Station, now boarding on track 4, a mechanized metallic voice droned over the PA system, cutting through the howling wind. Emily swallowed the dry lump in her throat and joined the sparse line of midnight travelers. The massive silver locomotive idled loudly, hissing thick clouds of steam into the freezing air like a sleeping dragon. Ahead of her in line stood a wealthy-looking man in his early 60s, wrapped in a bespoke charcoal gray cashmere overcoat. He carried a sleek silver briefcase and moved with the easy, predatory arrogance of a man who owned the ground he walked on. Emily didn't know him, but his presence made the hair on her arms stand up. "Ticket, please," a deep, gravelly voice demanded. Emily flinched. The conductor, standing at the door of car 4, was a broad-shouldered man in his 50s. His name tag read, Marcus Hale. Hale had the weathered, exhausted face of a man who had spent 3 decades riding metal tubes through the dark. He scanned the wealthy man's ticket first. The businessman murmured something low. Marcus nodded slowly, his face an unreadable mask. "The signal stays dark tonight, Mr. Brandt. Watch your step on the ice." Emily frowned. It was a bizarre, poetic phrasing that felt entirely out of place. Victor Brandt boarded. It was Emily's turn. She stepped up, her hands trembling as she handed Marcus her phone. The machine beeped green. But Marcus didn't immediately step aside. His deep-set eyes flicked down, locking onto the heavy canvas duffel bag pressed against her stomach. For a fraction of a second, a look of profound, tragic pity washed over his face. "Rough night to be traveling, miss," Marcus rumbled. "Family emergency." Emily lied, her voice tight. Marcus hesitated. He leaned in just a fraction of an inch, the smell of stale coffee and winter mint radiating off him. "The signal stays dark tonight, miss," he whispered. "Don't leave your seat." Emily froze. He had repeated the exact same phrase. Was it a company warning about the storm? She nodded tightly, hurrying past him and stepping up into the stifling warmth of car 4. The heavy pneumatic doors hissed shut behind her. The locks engaged with a heavy, final thud, sealing out the blizzard. Chapter 2. The Impossible Number. Car 4 was a sleeper coach hybrid, bathed in dim amber lighting that smelled faintly of industrial carpet cleaner and damp wool. It was mostly empty. Victor Brandt sat 3 rows ahead in the business class section, methodically typing on a sleek laptop. Across the aisle, a college student in a heavy parka was passed out, wearing large noise-canceling headphones. Emily found seat 12A. She shoved the heavy duffel bag beneath her seat, wrapping the long canvas strap twice around her left ankle. She wasn't going to let out of her sight. At 11:45 p.m., the train lurched forward. The steel wheels shrieked against the icy tracks, and Train 17 plunged into the pitch-black corridor of the Northeast. Emily reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a crumpled thermal receipt. She had bought a black coffee at a terminal kiosk just minutes before boarding. She smoothed the paper out on her tray table, staring blindly at the printed timestamp. 11:38 p.m. She needed something to anchor her racing mind. At 1:12 a.m., somewhere past Providence, the train was a bullet cutting through a void of black snow. The car was dead quiet. The college kid was snoring softly. Marcus Hale had walked through once to check seat markers and had since vanished into the forward cars. Then her cell phone vibrated. Emily gasped, her heart slamming violently against her ribs. She pulled the phone from her pocket. The screen glowed harshly in the dim cabin. The caller ID was impossible. It wasn't a blocked number, nor did it have a recognizable area code. It was an error string. 000000000. Her thumb hovered over the green button. Trembling, she swiped right and pressed the phone to her ear. "Hello." Static hissed through the tiny speaker, layered with a rhythmic, wet clicking sound. Then a voice spoke. It was electronically synthesized, stripped entirely of humanity. "The signal stays dark, Emily. Walk to the vestibule at the rear of car 4. Bring the bag. Do not look back, or your brother dies in his cell." The line went dead. Emily squeezed her eyes shut. She looked around the quiet car. Brant was still typing. The student was still asleep. She had no choice. She unspooled the canvas strap from her ankle. Hauling the heavy duffel over her shoulder, she stood up, bracing herself against the headrests as the train swayed violently around curve. She walked down the narrow, carpeted aisle toward the rear of the car. As she reached the heavy sliding door at the back, her fingers fumbled. The crumpled coffee receipt slipped from her hand, fluttering down to rest on the carpeted floor just outside the doorframe. She didn't stop to pick it up. She pressed the green sensor pad. The door slid open, and she stepped into the vestibule. The vestibule was the noisy, rattling accordion joint connecting car 4 to car 5. It was freezing here. The roar of the tracks was deafening, the metal floor plates shifting and grinding beneath her boots. To her left and right were the heavy exterior doors, featuring small, sealed windows looking out into the blizzard. The door to car 4 hissed shut behind her, locking her in the small, vibrating chamber. "I'm here," Emily whispered into the empty space. Above her, the fluorescent light flickered. A metallic screech echoed from the solid steel wall to her right. The wall seemed to shift. When Train 17 rolled into the subterranean gloom of New York's Penn Station 3 hours later, the exterior doors opened. The passengers disembarked, but Emily Carter was not among them. When Marcus Hale performed his final sweep of car 4, the exterior doors of the train had not been opened during transit. The emergency windows were factory sealed, but Emily and the $48,000 were gone. Chapter 3. The Washed-Up Hack. Daniel Reeves was staring at the bottom of a glass of cheap rye whiskey, wondering exactly when his soul had died. At 38, Daniel looked like a man who had gone 10 rounds with a heavyweight and forgotten to duck. He had 3 days of dark stubble on his jaw, permanent dark circles under his eyes, and a profound, lingering cynicism. 3 years ago, he was a star investigative reporter for the New York Tribune, breaking municipal corruption scandals that made headlines across the country. Then came the Hudson Street piece, a massive expose on a prominent city councilman that blew up in Daniel's face when his primary source was exposed as a fabricator. Daniel was fired, discredited, sued, and quietly blacklisted. Now, he survived by writing clickbait true crime articles for a digital rag that paid him by the word. His cell phone buzzed on the battered wooden desk of his cramped Queens apartment. It was 9 a.m. on a Wednesday. The caller ID belonged to Tommy, a graveyard shift dispatcher for the Amtrak police and one of Daniel's last remaining contacts who still fed him scraps. "Danny," Tommy said, his voice hushed and conspiratorial. "I got something that's going to make your teeth itch. You still looking for locked room mysteries?" "Only if they pay enough to cover my bar tab," Daniel grumbled, rubbing his eyes. "A girl vanished off Train 17 last night. Boston to New York. A nurse named Emily Carter. People miss their stops, Tommy. They jump off at Providence to visit a boyfriend." "Not this one," Tommy insisted. "I'm looking at the door telemetry right now. Once that train left Boston, not a single exterior door was opened. The emergency windows are double-paned Lexan safety glass. They're completely intact. The cameras in car 4 show her walking into the rear vestibule at 1:17 a.m. She never walked out. We swept the train top to bottom at Penn Station. She evaporated, Danny." Daniel sat up, the alcohol fog instantly lifting from his brain. His journalistic instincts, dormant for 3 years, twitched to life. "Cameras show anything else?" "Nothing. The feed in the vestibule is clean. Oh, and her family just reported she took 48 grand out of her savings yesterday morning. Physical cash. Daniel pulled his laptop toward him. Send me the file. An hour later, Daniel's living room wall was covered in digital sticky notes projected from his monitor. He ran a proprietary Python script he'd built during his glory days, a data scraping tool designed to cross-reference missing persons databases, transit routes, and unexplained disappearances. He typed in the parameters: Amtrak, Northeast Corridor, missing person, train 17. The progress bar stalled, spinning for nearly a minute. Then it flashed green. 7 hits. Daniel leaned closer to the monitor, the blue light reflecting in his wide eyes. Over the past 15 years, 7 other people had vanished on train 17. Different months, different years, but the variables were identical. All boarded in Boston, all bound for New York, all vanished somewhere between Providence and the final stop. He opened the digitized police report for a victim from 2018, a real estate developer. Subject reported missing upon train's arrival in New York, carrying an estimated $100,000 in bearer bonds. Last seen entering vestibule connecting cars 4 and 5. Door telemetry showed no breaches. He clicked on another. A high-end escort from 2015, carrying $30,000 cash. Vanished. Doors sealed. 7 people. Hundreds of thousands of dollars in total. One specific train. Daniel grabbed his heavy wool coat. He needed to see the surveillance footage, and he knew exactly who to bother to get it. Chapter 4. The Seamless Loop. Detective Lena Ortiz did not look happy to see him. Ortiz was 41, a razor-sharp NYPD cold case investigator who wore tailored leather jackets and possessed a stare that could peel paint off a wall. She met Daniel in the freezing, windswept plaza outside Moynihan Train Hall, handing him a paper cup of scalding black coffee. "You're a parasite, Reeves," she said as a greeting. "If my lieutenant sees me passing files to a disgraced blogger, I'll be directing traffic in Staten Island by tomorrow." "Good to see you too, Lena," Daniel said. "Tell me you've seen the Carter file." NYPD doesn't have primary jurisdiction yet. The FBI and Amtrak police are currently measuring tapes to see who gets the paperwork. She didn't just vanish, Lena. She was taken, and it's a serial operation. Daniel handed her a thick manila folder. 7 names, all train 17, all carrying heavy cash, all vanished in a thin air. Ortiz opened the folder, her dark eyes scanning the data. Her cynical expression faltered. "Door Shenshores. Clean across the board," Daniel said. "You can't jump off a train moving 80 miles an hour without breaking a window or overriding a pneumatic door lock. Doing so triggers an alarm in the engineer's cabin. None of these cases feature a tripped alarm. Someone is taking them inside the train." Ortiz stared at the snowy street. "I pulled a raw video feed from Car 4 this morning. I've watched it 5 times. She walks to the back, and the camera shows an empty hallway for the next 2 hours. There's no deletion." "Show me," Daniel demanded. An hour later, they were huddled in Daniel's cramped apartment. Ortiz had brought a high-capacity, encrypted flash drive. They watched the footage on Daniel's dual monitors. Emily Carter, looking terrified, walked down the aisle. She reached the door. The crumpled coffee receipt fell from her hand, landing on the carpet. She stepped into the vestibule at 1:17 a.m. The door closed behind her. "Watch her phone records," Daniel pointed to another document. At 1:14 a.m., she received call. "The incoming number log on the cell tower is 000-000-0000. A spoofed VoIP number," Ortiz noted. "Somebody routed it through the train's internal Wi-Fi network," Daniel corrected. They lured her to the vestibule. "Now look back at the video. Watch the receipt on the floor." Ortiz squinted at the screen. At 1 hour, 17 minutes, and 4 seconds, the receipt was on the carpet. The digital timestamp in the bottom right corner ticked to 1 hour, 17 minutes, and 5 seconds. The receipt simply vanished. Ortiz gasped softly. The camera didn't blink. The timestamp didn't jump. "It's a loop," Daniel said, a cold realization washing over him. They didn't delete the footage. They overwrote it. Someone patched a 20-minute segment of empty hallway footage from earlier in the night over the live feed. The timestamp clock is generated by the server, so it keeps counting normally, but the video itself is fake. That's why the receipt disappeared. In the patched footage from earlier in the night, the receipt wasn't on the floor yet. Whoever did this had backdoor access to the train security server. Ortiz said, her cop instincts fully engaged. And the servers are located in the conductor's cabin. Marcus Hale, Daniel said. He was on shift for Emily Carter, and he was the conductor on shift for 4 of the other disappearances. Chapter 5, The False Confession. Before they could track down Marcus Hale, Ortiz's phone rang. She answered, listened for a moment, and hung up, her face tight. We got a confession, Ortiz said. A transient named Jimmy Kellen just walked into the 14th precinct. He says he killed Emily Carter. They raced to the precinct. Jimmy was a jittery, emaciated addict who spent his nights sleeping in the abandoned switch houses of the Queens rail yards. He sat in the interrogation room, shivering violently. Daniel watched through the two-way mirror as Ortiz interrogated him. I did it, Jimmy stammered, picking at his fingernails. I sneaked onto the train in Boston. I hid in the luggage racks. When she came out to the vestibule, I tried to mug her. She fought back. I popped the emergency door release and shoved her out over the Connecticut River. I took her bag and jumped off when the train slowed down. Ortiz placed an evidence bag on the table. Inside was a heavy multi-tool with a rusted blade. We found this in your tent, Jimmy. It has Emily Carter's blood on it. Daniel hit the intercom button on the wall. Jimmy, you said you pushed her out over the Connecticut River Bridge? Jimmy looked up at the mirror. Yeah, over the bridge. Train 17 crosses the Connecticut River Bridge at 70 miles an hour, Daniel stated, his voice hard. The Amfleet 2 cars have an interlocking pneumatic safety mechanism. If an exterior door is manually overridden and opened while the train is moving over 10 miles an hour, the emergency air brakes automatically engage. The train stops dead. Train 17 didn't stop last night. It didn't even slow down. Jimmy froze. His eyes darted nervously around the room. I don't know about no brakes. You didn't open the door. Daniel pressed over the speaker. Who told you to confess to this, Jimmy? Who gave you the bloody tool? Jimmy began to hyperventilate. He said he'd kill me. He said if I took the manslaughter plea, he'd put 20 grand in my sister's commissary account. Who? Ortiz demanded, slamming her hands on the table. The man in the fancy coat. Jimmy cried out. The rich guy. He's always at the arts. Daniel looked through the glass, his mind flashing back to the passenger manifest he'd pulled. Victor Brandt, the billionaire. He had been in Carrefour with Emily. Daniel met Ortiz in the hallway. Victor Brandt owns Brandt Logistics. They hold the exclusive government contract to retrofit and maintain the HVAC systems for Amtrak's entire Northeast Corridor fleet. He has access to every single train car. He's paying off transients to close the cases. Okay, let's assume Brandt is running a murder ring, Ortiz said, rubbing her temples. How do you make a body disappear from a sealed train? Where did she go? Chapter 6, The Ghost in the Steel. Ortiz pulled out a sealed evidence bag from her desk drawer. Inside was a digital audio recorder. If we're going down this rabbit hole, you need to hear this, Ortiz said. This is from victim number 4. A man named Arthur Pendleton vanished in 2016. He accidentally but dialed his wife's voicemail right before he disappeared. She pressed play. For 10 seconds, the recording captured only the rhythmic clack-clack of the train on the tracks. Then, Arthur's voice, sounding utterly terrified. Where are you taking me? You said this was a clean exchange. Then, a sound that made the hairs on Daniel's arms stand up. It was a horrific, shrieking wail. It sounded like a woman screaming in pure agony, echoing from beyond the grave, followed by a heavy, metallic thud. Then, absolute silence. The internet sleuths call it the ghost of Carrefour, Ortiz said softly. They think the route is haunted. Daniel closed his eyes, isolating the frequency in his mind. He had spent months writing an investigative piece on subway infrastructure at train manufacturing. He knew that sound. Play it again, Daniel commanded. Ortiz hit rewind. The shriek played again. That's not a ghost, Daniel said, his eyes snapping open. That's acoustic resonance. It's the sound of the train's high-pressure pneumatic airlines blowing over uninsulated steel. You only hear that specific harmonic frequency when a pressurized internal door is opened. Ortiz frowned. There are no pressurized internal doors in the passenger cars. Not on the public blueprints, no, Daniel said, rapidly pulling up schematics on his laptop. He accessed a deeper database, pulling up the retrofit schematics from Brandt Logistics. He overlaid the floor plan of Car 4 with the cafe car, Car 5. Look, Daniel pointed to the junction between the cars. Between the passenger carriage and the cafe car, there's a crew luggage storage area and a bulkhead. If you welded a false steel wall just 2 feet forward into the vestibule, you'd create a blind void between the cars. A compartment measuring 2 feet wide by 6 feet tall, big enough to hide a person. Ortiz stared at the screen, realization dawning on her face. A hidden service compartment, right in the middle of the train. They call the victim to the vestibule, Daniel said. They trigger the pneumatic door, the banshee wail. They drag them into the void, lock it, and loop the cameras. The police and the dogs search the train at the station, but the bodies are inside the walls. And they stay perfectly hidden until the train rides into the maintenance yards after the passengers disembark. Ortiz finished. That's when Brandt's crew unloads the bodies. Train 17 makes its return trip tonight, Daniel said, checking his watch. It departs Penn Station for Boston at midnight. They're going to use the same cars. I'm coming with you, Ortiz said, grabbing her badge and her Glock. Chapter 7. The Confrontation. The platform at Penn Station was a cavern of concrete and hissing steam. Train 17 sat like a silver bullet in the gloom, waiting for its midnight departure. Daniel boarded Car 4 just before the doors closed. He moved down the aisle, the heavy rumble of the diesel engines vibrating through the soles of his boots. He took a seat near the back. 10 minutes into the ride, conductor Marcus Hale walked into the car. He looked older, weighed down by invisible chains. Daniel stood up, blocking the aisle. Tickets, Marcus rumbled. Daniel leaned in close. The signal stays dark, Marcus. Hale stopped dead. The ticket puncher hovered in the air. For a split second, sheer panic flared in the conductor's eyes. I know about the void space in the vestibule, Daniel whispered. I know about Brandt. Tell me what happened to Emily Carter, or I burn this entire operation to the ground. Marcus grabbed Daniel's arm, his grip like a vice, and dragged him toward the heavy sliding door at the back of the car. They pushed through into the freezing, noisy vestibule. Are you insane? Marcus hissed over the roar of the tracks. You don't understand how deep this goes. Brandt relocates people. Cartel guys, fugitives. They pay millions. But the desperate ones? The ones carrying 50 grand? He doesn't relocate them. He slaughters them and steals their clean identities to sell. Where's the door? Daniel demanded. Marcus pointed a trembling finger at the solid metal wall housing the fire extinguisher. Behind the panel, it's a pneumatic hinge. Before Daniel could inspect it, the heavy metal door connecting to Car 5 violently slammed open. A massive man stepped into the vestibule. He wore a heavy tactical coat and had the flattened, dead eyes of a professional killer. Brandt's enforcer. You dropped something, reporter? The enforcer growled. The enforcer lunged. Daniel dodged a heavy haymaker that dented the steel wall where his head had just been. The vestibule was too small for a fight. The enforcer grabbed Daniel by the lapels of his coat and slammed him backward into the exterior door. The enforcer reached into his pocket and pulled out an override key. He jammed it into the exterior door's control panel. Hiss! The pneumatic lock disengaged. The heavy door slid open a crack, and a vortex of freezing, violent wind ripped into the vestibule. The train was doing 80 miles an hour through the dark Bronx transit corridor. The enforcer grabbed Daniel by the throat and shoved him toward the open gap. Daniel choked, his boots slipping on the wet metal grating. Half of his body was suddenly out in the freezing night, the violent wind tearing at his clothes. He saw the blur of track pylons whipping by inches from his skull. In a surge of pure, desperate adrenaline, Daniel reached into his pocket, pulled out a heavy metal tactical pin, and drove it blindly into the enforcer's thigh. The man roared, his grip loosening for a fraction of a second. Daniel twisted violently, grabbing the enforcer's heavy arm and dropping to the floor. The enforcer tripped over Daniel's leg, stumbling forward toward the open doorway. He flailed, grabbing the edge of the doorframe. The train banked violently to the left. The centrifugal force ripped the enforcer's grip from the frame. With a short, truncated scream, the man vanished into the darkness outside. Daniel scrambled backward, slamming his hand on the emergency close button. The door hissed shut and locked. Marcus Hale stood in the corner, paralyzed with terror. "Emily is alive," Marcus gasped out. "They don't run the incinerator until Thursday. She's being held in the subterranean tunnels beneath Penn Station. They're going to burn her tonight." Daniel pulled out his phone and dialed Ortiz. "Lena, they have Emily in the maintenance tunnels under Penn Station. Bring the tactical unit. We're ending this." "Copy that, Daniel." Ortiz's voice crackled over the line. "I'm heading down there now. Meet me at Sector 4. Chapter 8, The Betrayal." Daniel got off the train at the next stop, stole a cab, and raced back to Manhattan. It took him 40 minutes to breach the maintenance access grates behind Moynihan Train Hall. The tunnels beneath Penn Station were a subterranean labyrinth of dripping concrete, high-voltage cables, and absolute darkness. It felt like walking through the intestines of a metal beast. He moved silently through the damp corridors, following the sound of heavy industrial machinery. He rounded a corner and saw it, a massive, floodlit cavern. In the center was a towering iron incinerator, its roaring orange flames casting demonic shadows on the walls. Next to it was a hydraulic crushing press used for scrapping decommissioned train cars. Standing near the furnace was Victor Brandt, wearing his pristine overcoat, flanked by 2 armed mercenaries. And kneeling on the concrete floor, bound with heavy industrial zip ties, was Emily Carter. She looked pale and bruised, but she was alive. Daniel reached for his phone to coordinate with Ortiz's SWAT team, but a cold voice echoed from the shadows behind him. "Drop the phone, Daniel." Daniel spun around. Detective Lena Ortiz stepped out from behind a rusted support pillar. She was holding her suppressed 9mm Glock. It was pointed directly at Daniel's chest. "Lena," Daniel breathed, the betrayal hitting him like a physical blow. Ortiz walked forward, her face a mask of stone. "I told you to drop the podcast pitch, Reeves. You just had to play the hero. You sold your badge," Daniel spat, the horrifying reality snapping into focus. "You're his cleaner. Every time someone vanished, you took the cold case. You made sure the NYPD chased their tails while Brandt burned the evidence. Municipal corruption pays pennies," Ortiz said smoothly, disarming Daniel and shoving him toward the center of the room. "Brandt pays me 5 times what the city does to make sure his logistics network stays quiet. It's just economics." Brandt smiled as Daniel was forced to his knees next to Emily. "Ah, the intrepid journalist. I admire your tenacity, Mr. Reeves. But you are interfering with a highly profitable enterprise. You're slaughtering desperate people," Daniel snarled. "I'm providing a service," Brandt corrected. "Ash leaves no paper trail. Toss them both in the crushing press. Let's clean this up." Chapter 9, The Ticking Clock. Ortiz dragged Daniel and Emily toward the massive hydraulic crushing press. It was a steel frame the size of a house, designed to compress train carriages into cubes. Brandt walked over to the control console and slammed his hand on the green activation button. A deafening horn blared. The ground shook as the massive hydraulic walls of the press began to inch inward, groaning with thousands of tons of pressure. T-minus 15 minutes. "Throw them in," Brandt ordered. Ortiz shoved Daniel and Emily into the center of the crushing bay. The heavy steel gates locked behind them. The walls began to close in, the gap narrowing steadily. "I'm sorry," Emily sobbed, coughing violently through the dust. "I just want to save my brother. We're not dying here," Daniel yelled over the screeching metal. He looked around the bay. The hydraulic walls were moving closer, the space shrinking to 10 feet. He saw a heavy, severed high-tension electrical cable hanging loosely from the ceiling of the press, previously used to power the interior lights of the scrap cars. Daniel pulled his pocket knife, the one Ortiz hadn't found his boot, and began frantically sawing at the heavy plastic zip ties binding Emily's wrists. Outside the cage, Ortiz stood watching, her gun lowered. "Lena!" Daniel screamed through the steel mesh. "He's going to kill you eventually. You know he leaves no loose ends." Ortiz didn't blink. But Brandt looked at her, his eyes narrowing slightly. The space shrank to 6 feet. Daniel snapped the zip ties. He hauled Emily to her feet. "Grab that rubber mat." He pointed to a thick insulation mat on the floor. He reached up, grabbing the heavy high-tension cable. He stripped the rubber casing back with his knife, exposing the raw copper wire. "Get back!" Daniel yelled. He jammed the exposed copper wire directly into the main hydraulic fluid line running along the moving wall. 10,000 volts of industrial electricity surged through the conductive fluid. The electrical feedback was catastrophic. The control console where Brandt was standing exploded in a shower of sparks and blinding blue light. The entire crushing press violently short-circuited. The hydraulic walls ground to a shuddering, screeching halt just 3 feet apart. The safety locks blew outward. The heavy steel gates swung open. Daniel grabbed Emily's hand and sprinted out of the press. Brandt was on the floor, his coat smoking from the electrical blast. His mercenaries raised their weapons, but the power surge had blown the main lighting relays. The cavern plunged into pitch-black darkness, lit only by the orange glow of the incinerator. Gunfire erupted blindly in the dark. Bullets ricocheted off the concrete. "Go!" Daniel shoved Emily toward the service elevator. Suddenly, the heavy blast doors of the cavern kicked open. Flashlights pierced the gloom, accompanied by the deafening roar of federal tactical teams. "FBI, drop your weapons." Daniel had set a dead man's switch on his laptop. When he didn't check in, an automated email dumped the entire compiled dossier. The loop video, the VoIP traces, the architectural blueprints of the hidden compartment, directly to the New York FBI field office. Brandt's mercenaries dropped their guns instantly. Brandt tried to run, dragging the heavy blue duffel bag of cash toward a drainage tunnel. An FBI agent tackled him to the concrete, cuffing him brutally. Ortiz lay on the floor, her weapon kicked away, staring at the ceiling in disbelief as federal agents swarmed her. Daniel leaned against the cold concrete wall, gasping for air. He looked at Emily. She was trembling, tears cutting through the grease on her face, but she was safe. The nightmare was over. Chapter 10, The Architect. 3 weeks later, the fallout was biblical. Victor Brandt was in federal lockup, facing multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole. Lena Ortiz had taken a plea deal, giving up the names of every corrupt official in the city to avoid the needle. Marcus Hale had secured full federal protection and a reduced sentence for his cooperation, finally allowing the old conductor to sleep at night. Daniel Reeves got a story. It wasn't clickbait. It was a 15,000-word expose published on the front page of the New York Tribune, earning him his desk back, a massive advance for a book deal and national television syndication. The mystery was solved. The ghosts were laid to rest. It was a quiet Tuesday evening. Daniel was sitting in his new, spacious office overlooking Manhattan, typing up the final chapter of the book he was writing on the case. Emily Carter had been granted immunity in exchange for her testimony. Her brother's blackmailers had scattered to the wind when the FBI tore through the Brooklyn syndicates looking for Brandt's connections. A bittersweet, clean ending. Daniel poured himself a glass of expensive bourbon. He hit save on his manuscript. He leaned back and opened the original digital folder containing the evidence, wanting to review the sequence of events one last time. He clicked on the surveillance video from Boston South Station, the footage of Emily before she boarded Train 17. He watched her walk through the concourse. He watched her wait on the platform. He watched her shiver in the cold. Daniel paused the video. He frowned. Something about her body language was wrong. When he had first watched this footage, he had been looking for clues about the time loop discrepancy. Now, knowing the truth, he watched Emily's face. She didn't look like a terrified nurse carrying $48,000 in blood money. She looked focused, calculated. Daniel zoomed in on her hands. The resolution was grainy, but with a few strokes of his keyboard, He ran a basic enhancement filter. He watched Emily as she pulled the thermal coffee receipt from her pocket, the receipt she would later drop outside the vestibule, the receipt that proved the camera loop. Daniel's blood ran cold. She wasn't just holding a receipt. She was doing something incredibly subtle. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small, metallic device. She attached it to the back of the receipt with a dab of adhesive. It was a microtransmitter, a Wi-Fi bridging node, a stingray device. Daniel's breath hitched in his throat. He pulled up the FBI evidence log he had downloaded from his contacts. He scrolled down to the inventory of the duffel bag recovered from the tunnel. Item 41A. One canvas duffel bag containing 480 banded stacks of $100 United States currency. Note: laboratory analysis confirms all currency is high-grade counterfeit, produced by the Blackwood Syndicate. Daniel leaned back in his seat, the horrifying reality washing over him like ice water. Emily hadn't dropped the receipt by accident to create a timestamp discrepancy. She dropped the receipt by the vestibule door on purpose, planting the Wi-Fi bridge directly outside the hidden compartment so that the impossible phone call could successfully bypass the train's internal firewall. She didn't receive the call. She initiated it. Daniel pulled up Emily's background file. He scrolled past her nursing credentials, digging deeper, going back 10 years to her maiden name. Carter wasn't her real last name. Her real name was Emily Blackwood. Her brother wasn't a victim of a syndicate. Her brother ran a rival syndicate in Boston. Victor Brandt had been moving in on their territory, monopolizing the underground identity trade on the East Coast. Emily hadn't been lured on a Train 17. She had intentionally loaded a bag with counterfeit cash, rigged the train's network, and allowed herself to be taken by Brandt's men. She knew about the hidden compartments. She knew about the incinerator tunnels. She knew Ortiz was dirty. She needed a way to destroy Brandt's empire from the inside out, but she couldn't do it herself without triggering a massive gang war. She needed a battering ram. She needed a desperate, hungry journalist who would pull the threads, involve the FBI, and blow the lid off the entire operation while she played the helpless, terrified victim. Daniel stared at the paused frame of Emily's face on the screen. She was looking directly at the security camera on the platform, and just for a fraction of a second before she turned away, she was smiling. Daniel's cell phone buzzed on the mahogany desk. He flinched. He picked it up. The caller ID was a string of zeros. 000 000 0000. He pressed the phone to his ear, his hand trembling slightly. "Hello," Daniel whispered. "The signal stays dark, Danny," Emily's voice said. She didn't sound like a terrified nurse anymore. Her voice was crisp, cold, and dripping with authority. "Thanks for doing the heavy lifting. Don't look back." The line went dead. Daniel sat in the silence of his office, listening to the dial tone, realizing that the mystery wasn't solved at all. It had merely changed hands. He slowly closed his laptop. He would write the book exactly as she wanted him to, because in the end, the ghost of Train 17 wasn't the victim. She was the architect,